Welcome to Russian History Retold, Episode 328, Russian Expansion under Ivan the Great. Last time, we covered the great scientists during the Soviet era. Today, we move back in time to the era of Ivan III, also known as Ivan the Great, and the expansion of the Muscovite kingdom. Now, before we get into the expansion, let's talk about Ivan a bit, as we haven't said much about him for quite some time. Born on January 22nd, 1440, to Grand Prince Vasily II and Maria of Borovsk, Ivan would become co-ruler of Moscow and then all of Russia, starting in 1462. His reign, which would be the second longest behind his grandson Ivan IV, would bring stability to Russia, which had been racked with civil war for decades. Ivan would introduce a more centralized government and would be the first Grand Prince to use the name Tsar. His marriage to Sophia Paleolog in 1472, after the death of his first wife, Maria of Tver, would lead credence to his claim that Moscow was the third Rome after the fall of Constantinople in 1453, as she was related to the last ruling family of the Byzantine Empire. The friendship with the Paleologs was long, as Ivan's grandfather, Vasily I, married his daughter Anna to Emperor John VIII Paleologus of Byzantium in 1414. Now, having reviewed Ivan's early years, it's time to turn to the hows and whys of how this Tsar expanded the Muscovite Principality and to what would become the Russian Empire. 6 ways helped Ivan III convert the Grand Duchy of Muscovy into the nation we now know as Russia. His reign marked a transformative period in Russian history as he significantly expanded the territory and laid the foundations for a centralized Russian state. The first is his annexation of Novgorod in 1478. The animosity between Moscow and Novgorod went back for decades, especially under Vasily II. Ivan was growing increasingly annoyed by the wavering loyalty of the Novgorodian boyars between Moscow and Lithuania. This perceived disloyalty initiated his launching a series of campaigns against the Republic of Novgorod. They would switch back and forth, which led to 3 invasions and defeats of the Novgorodian armies. The lay people leaned toward Moscow and Russia, while the boyar class, insistent on remaining autonomous, would constantly reach out to Lithuania and their leader, Casimir IV. One major factor in the lay people's allegiance to Moscow was, of course, religion. Moscow was the center of orthodoxy, and Lithuania was a Catholic nation. Interestingly, though, the Orthodox clergy was kind of split on which direction to turn to, as they were concerned about the Muscovite metropolitans' overreaching authority. After Ivan found out that the boyars of the north had reached out to the Lithuanians in defiance of a treaty signed by them, acknowledging Ivan as the Grand Prince, the Muscovite leader sent his troops to deal with what he felt was an insurrection. Ivan's army defeated the Novgorodians at the Battle of Shalon on July 14th, 1471. On August 11th of that same year, another peace treaty was signed. But over the next 6 years, an uneasy armistice helped avoid some of the additional fighting. The supposed turning point in Ivan's grab for Novgorod occurred in 1477, when 2 Novgorodian envoys, claiming to have been sent by the archbishops and the entire city, addressed Ivan in public audiences Gosyudar, or sovereign, instead of Господин, which meant sir. Ivan used this to fortify his claim to rule Novgorod, which was acknowledged on January 15, 1478. So, by that year, Ivan had successfully annexed Novgorod, bringing its vast lands under Moscow's control. This almost doubled the size of the Grand Duchy of Moscow, but was not quite enough to transform itself into a Russian nation, and certainly not in the eyes of the European monarchs of the time. Still, his move not only expanded Moscow's territory, but also secured its dominance over the lucrative trade routes in the region. One of the most lucrative was the trade with Western Europe and the furs of the East. This fur trade had enriched Novgorod and was a reason why they didn't want to give up this enriching business. It was now, though, a cash cow for Ivan and the people of Moscow. The second policy of Ivan's that made Muscovy grow was what they considered the consolidation of Russian lands, where he pursued the policy which we'd come to know to history as, quote, the gathering of the Russian lands. The first would be the old rival of Moscow, the Principality of Pskov. They owed their political fortunes to their aid to Moscow in their fight against Novgorod. Ivan was in the midst of an ambitious annexation of several principalities, including the Principality of Yaroslavl in 1463, Rostov in 1474, Tver in 1485, and Vyatka in 1489. This policy brought them all under Moscow's and Ivan III's rule. This strategy aimed to unify the East Slavic territories and strengthen Moscow's position as the center of power. The manner in which Ivan was able to take control of these different principalities would continue after his death in 1505, when his son Vasily III completed the annexation of Pskov in 1510. The third and most liberating reason for the ability to expand was the end of the Tatar dominance in 1480. Ivan III is credited with ending the dominance of the Mongol-Tatar Golden Horde over Russia. In 1480, he faced off against the Golden Horde in the standoff at the Ugra River, which ended without a battle, but marked the formal end of Tatar suzerainty over Moscow. It cannot be overstated how important the throwing off of the Mongol yoke is in the expansion of Russian territory. While Muscovy did expand under Mongol hegemony, when they were able to stop paying tribute, it freed up enormous amounts of capital that Ivan and his successors were able to use to buy out their rivals. While this goes back to the time of Ivan Moneybags, aka Ivan I, it was then accelerated under Ivan the Great. Conversely, being under the Mongol yoke aided in the eventual expansion of Muscovite territories during the reign of Ivan III. Now, you may ask, how did this repressive control over the land of the Rus aid in expanding in the future? Well, the Mongols educated the Russians by example. They showed that you could expand by raiding other lands and showing little mercy to your opponents. We saw this with the annexation of the territory of Novgorod. Other princes of other territories feared the type of retribution that Ivan imposed on Novgorod, and that led to them succumbing to Ivan's demands. I mentioned earlier the fourth important reason Ivan had for the massive expansion, his marriage to Sophia Paleologi. Ivan's marriage to Sophia, a Byzantine princess, had symbolic and political significance. It reinforced Moscow's claim as the successor to the Byzantine Empire and introduced the double-headed eagle as the symbol of Russian statehood. Now, the fifth way Ivan III expanded Russian territory was through diplomatic and military expansion. He used a combination of diplomacy and military conquest to expand Moscow's influence. He incorporated lands through treaties and strategic marriages, further consolidating his power. After Ivan had taken over Novgorod and Tver, he would face off against the Lithuanian menace to the east. The area was known as the Upper Oka, a border region between Lithuania and Moscow. There were many appanage princes who saw the direction where the wind was blowing, and it was in the direction of Moscow. They began to change their allegiance away from Lithuania and towards Ivan. Despite their attempts to change these princes' minds, they failed and were forced to accept an agreement with Moscow. When an additional number of princes defected from the south, Lithuania declared war in 1500. When Russia won a crucial battle on the shores of the Vedrosha River in 1503, the Lithuanians had no choice but to cede the lands around Smolensk, Chernihiv-Seversk, as well as Polotsk to Ivan. At the same time, the Livonian order was threatening Pskov, but they were handily repulsed, leading to the signing of a peace treaty ensuring Moscow's control of that principality. A sixth and sometimes underappreciated reason for Russia's rapid expansion is the abandonment of the appanage system. Previously, when the Grand Prince died, his estate would be split between his sons, with the eldest getting the biggest chunk and the youngest getting the smallest. This would split up the realm, never really allowing anyone to gain strength and power over its neighbors. Another major change that Ivan brought to the table was not allowing his brothers to gain any additional territory of their own. He had 4 brothers: Yuri, Andrei Bolshoi, the big, Boris, and Andrei Menshoi, the little. His brothers were awarded appanages in the will that Vasily II had given Ivan III, although he had given him the Grand Principality, of course. Yuri was given Dmitrov, Mozhaisk, Serpukov. Andrei Bolshoi was given Uglich, Verk, and Zvenigorod. Boris was given Volkomansk, Rzhev, and Ruza, while Andrei Menshoi was just given Vologda. Examples of this changed policy included the annexation of Dmitrov in 1472 when his childless brother Yuri died. When another brother, Andrew the Little, passed away in 1481, it gave Ivan Vologda, and in 1485 he forced his brother Michael to bequeath his principality to Ivan instead of his son. In 1500, Ivan would take half of Ryazan from their prince and became warden of his son, who retained the other half until he died. This is how he put an end to the appanage system and would only allow one heir to take the reins of his territory, thus allowing for the consolidation of Muscovy to continue, making it strong and a formidable power to keep expanding. He would also merge a boyar's territory into the Grand Duchy of Moscow if the father died without a male heir, as you've seen. This would apply to any region where the nobleman was even slightly wavering in their loyalty to Ivan. The Tsar would look for any excuse to wrest the land away from anyone he saw fit. Now, of course, if you were a staunch ally of Ivan, you would be greatly rewarded with some of the snatched lands, although he would keep most of it for himself, as he did with Novgorod, where he kept one half of the territory, giving the rest to his friends and allies. After formally annexing Novgorodian lands, Ivan became known as the sovereign of all Russia. So this was an important change, as it laid the groundwork for Ivan to claim all Slavic regions under his umbrella. Ivan would reduce the lands given to his sons, with only Vasily III having any substantial holdings. He would be named co-ruler in 1502, 3 years before Ivan's death. This would become the norm for future czars to follow. No longer would the sons of czars be guaranteed anything other than a seat near the court. This not only helped to increase the size of the state, but it also lowered the risk of having civil wars between the sons of the Grand Prince, as had been the case in the past. Ivan III's reign was pivotal in transforming Moscow from a regional principality into a centralized state, setting the stage for the rise of the Russian Empire. This expansionist mindset of many of the Russian rulers after Ivan III obviously continues to this day. It's one of the main justifications that Vladimir Putin is using in his attempt to regain territories in Ukraine that once belonged to the Russian Empire. Of course, it should be obvious to everyone that if the justifications that Putin uses in his attempt to regain territories, and this would just destroy Ukraine, but it wouldn't stop there. Russian expansionism is in their DNA, beginning with Ivan I, greatly enhanced by Ivan III and his son Vasily III, and carried on through the reigns of the Romanov Tsars such as Peter I, Catherine II, as well as Alexander I and II. Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Join me next time when we cover an event that stunned the world just prior to the beginning of World War II, the signing of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. But the episode after that is one that's really exciting for me, and it's an interview that I'll be doing with author David Chaffetz, who is just finished penning a book called Raiders, Rulers, and Traders. And it has to do with the history of the use of the horse in medieval times, and especially with the Mongols, Russia's expansionism, and a lot of the history of Russia. So it's a really exciting book that's coming out shortly, but we'll be interviewing the author before it comes out, and it'll be out in June. So until next time, до свидания и спасибо за внимание.